Let's look at 3 John. We've entitled it Walk in the Truth because we've heard this over and over again from John. Like, this is a way we live out the truth that we have as we walk in it, right? We do the truth. All right, so far in the book of 3 John, we saw last week the likely scenario is the Apostle John is now late in life, maybe in his 70s and 80s. He's likely living in Ephesus, overseeing some churches in the vicinity of Ephesus. He writes the book of 2 John to one particular church, but here in 3 John, he writes to a particular individual by the name of Gaius. Now, the context of Gaius is probably really similar to the context of 2 John. And in 2 John, we saw that there are many false teachers that share the world with us, right? Same in the first century as it is today. We get lots of different competing messages. And in the first century, there's many of them that are just traveling town to town, preaching a gospel that isn't true. And so this is likely the context for Gaius too. There's lots of competing messages out there. There's true gospel workers and there's those who are not. They have a facade as such. They're fake gospel workers, so to speak. They're false teachers. And so John talks to Gaius in the first half of this letter that we covered last week, and he says, when you encounter a true gospel worker, somebody who's promoting the real Jesus, one way that you walk in the truth is that we support them generously. We're going to support these gospel workers generously. They're promoting a real Jesus who actually exists and who can actually save, as opposed to all the fake Jesuses and fake gospels that we're also hearing around us. So that's one way our truth is going to work out. We work it out, we do it by generously supporting gospel workers. And do you remember what we saw in the book of 2 John as a way to discern who's a true gospel worker from a false teacher? Does anybody remember that way that John showed us? Love, yep. There's another one. What's that? Yeah, it's their message, right? We listen, like, what perspective of Jesus does this person have? If it's somehow twisted or different than what the Bible shows Jesus to be, then we can know right off the top, boom, they're a false teacher. We're not going to support them. We're not going to generously support them. We're not going to invite them in. But sometimes it's not nearly as easy to discern as that, is it? Like, sometimes the message is not blatant heresy. Sometimes it even is a message that's happening from within the church. It's not always gospel-believing churches versus whatever's out there, is it? Sometimes it's not even always just gospel-believing churches and other organizations that pretend to be Christian, like Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses, or even theologically liberal Protestant mainline churches. Like, it's not always that. Sometimes it's from right within the church. Sometimes it's from people who are part of our same local church. Sometimes it's folks who at least present themselves as Christian. And the message itself, the words coming out of the person's mouth, isn't always easy to discern. Is this true or is this not true? Sometimes it can get a little confusing and muddy. Like, even within the church, there is a competition for leadership, for influence, isn't there? Within Christendom. Like which preacher are you going to listen to? Like this one or that one? Or which author are you going to trust? This author or that author? What podcast are you going to subscribe to? This one or that one? Like, what teacher are you going to submit to? This one or that one? And within the Christian church, within Christendom, there are lots of options. And there's often lots of different views then also within Christendom of who God is, or who humanity is, or what is holiness, or how do we think about the Spirit? So it can get a little muddy and can get a little bit confusing. Who do we discern? How do we discern who to follow? Even within the church, how do we discern who to follow? And then to make it even a little bit messier yet, within the visible church being like we can see people who are attending the church. Within the visible church, there's a subset that we call the invisible church. The invisible church are those who are in a saving relationship with the God of the universe. This is the family of faith. But what we see on Sunday mornings isn't just that. There's unbelievers here too. By God's grace, we want non-believers here as well as believers. So the visible church, what we see within the Christendom, contains both believers and unbelievers. So how do we discern who to follow? As we face competing messages in this competition for your trust, this competition really to lead you, how do we discern who to follow? We feel that question today. And Gaius felt that question in the first century as well. Within the first century, there were lots of competing messages, not with outside the church only, but also within the church too. And so our text today, we get a gift. We get the Apostle Paul, not Paul, John. The Apostle John is going to answer this question for us. And our question this morning is this, he's gonna answer for us. Within the church, how do we discern who to follow? When it's not clear just from the words coming out of their mouth, how do we discern who to follow? We get the Apostle John to guide us through this. We're gonna be in the book of 3 John today, so if you're not there yet, please make your way to 3 John. If you don't own a Bible, didn't bring a Bible, there's some on the back of the AV booth on the table. Please grab one. We're gonna be in 3 John today. And if you don't own a Bible, we would love to gift you one of those. Just take one of those home. We'd love to gift that to you. Remember, our question is this: who do we allow a voice into our life? Who do we allow to shape us? Who do we follow? Our full text today is going to be verses 9 through 15. We're going to finish out 3 John. We're going to work our way through here in sections. And remember the context here so far. So far, John has been bent on showing Gaius that you have the truth, Gaius. Now, one way we work that out is by generously supporting gospel workers. Like, that's what a Christian does, is evidence that you're a Christian. But within the local church, there's not unity on this issue. It's messy. In fact, there is a power play brewing. Even within a church that John oversees, one of the churches he oversees, there is a power struggle happening. Now, let's read about it, because John's going to use that scenario to help us discern who should we follow. Let's read the scenario. 3 John, starting in verse 9. I'm going to read verses 9 through 10. Verse 9. I have written something to the church, but Diotrephes, who likes to put himself first, does not acknowledge our authority. So if I come, I will bring up what he is doing, talking wicked nonsense against us. And not content with that, he refuses to welcome the brothers, and also stops those who want to, and puts them out of the church. Like, this is fascinating, isn't it? Because we are getting a glimpse into the first century church. Like, this is still within one generation of Jesus. And it is messy. This power struggle is existing. This isn't just issues that church today deals with. This was first century church. Sometimes we say we just want to go back to the early church because it's so perfect back there. It was not perfect, was it? You read through the letters of Paul, and we see it's a mess back there. And so we're getting a glimpse in here. There's a power struggle brewing. And what is it here in this sense? In verse 9, John says he has written a letter to the church, but this Diotrephes has decided he's going to reject the words of John. That's the words here behind the ESV's translation, that they're rejecting his authority. They're rejecting his words. They're not going to listen to John in that letter. Maybe that letter was 2 John. Could be. It could be a lost letter. We don't know. But either way, Diotrephes has decided, I am not going to listen to the Apostle John. That's a bold move, isn't it? Like, who's this Diotrephes guy? I know the Apostle John is. Like, he lived with Jesus. Now Diotrephes thinks he's just gonna not listen to John at all anymore. But John diagnoses why. Do you see that? Why does John say Diotrephes is not gonna listen anymore? Yeah, he loves to put himself first. Like, his heart is bent back on himself. Like, there's an ego, he wants some more authority, some more influence, some more power. This isn't just a problem of our church, is it? Of like the modern church. Is this the problem in our modern day churches? Yeah, and we're seeing it right here in the first century too. Like, Diotrephes has a twisted heart, and it's coming out in some bad fruit. Like, John should be able to diagnose this pretty quickly, shouldn't he? Like, this should be really personal to John. Do you remember when John was a young man, and he was one of Jesus' 12 disciples, so Jesus is still alive? It's him and his brother James. And we have a story in the book of Matthew where their mother, the mother of James and John, takes James and John and she goes to Jesus. And you remember what she pleads for Jesus for? She says, I want you to give my 2 sons a place of honor and prestige among all the disciples. I want you to put them first. Yeah, I want to read this. This is fascinating to me. This is out of Matthew 20. Then the mother of the sons of Zebedee, that's James and John, came up to him, being Jesus, with her sons. So James and John are right there. They're hearing everything that's going on. And kneeling before him, she asked him for something. And he said to her, "What do you want?" She said to him, "Say that these two sons of mine are to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your kingdom." This is bold, isn't it? This is places of prestige and power and honor. And Jesus answered, "You do not know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I am to drink?" They said to him, "We are able." So James and John speak up here, and they're like, "Yeah, we're able to do it." They don't know what they're saying, but we're able to. So then Jesus said to them, "You will drink my cup, but to sit at my right hand and at my left is not mine to grant, but is for those to whom it has been prepared by my Father." And when the 10 heard it, they were indignant at the brothers. Like, of course they were, right? The other 10 disciples hear that James and John, their mom's leveraging to give them a place of honor over all the rest of the disciples. And so Jesus calls all of them together and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them." Like, this is worldly leadership. This is how it normally goes. Our leaders want us to know that they are the leaders. They are the ones with honor. They're the ones with authority. They get all the benefits of that. But Jesus says, "It shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Whoever would be first among you must be your slave. Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So James and John come to Jesus, make us first among all the disciples. And then Jesus turns it completely upside down, doesn't he? Like, that's not how it works in the family of faith. Those who lead in the church, you are called to serve. Like, you're not going to seek your own influence. You're not going to seek to have this authority. You're going to seek your own honor. So it flips it all the way upside down for John. And I have to think that is all now crashing back on John as he's diagnosing what's going on with Diotrephes. It sure seems like John learned his lesson in some ways, doesn't it? And so he's able to diagnose a heart that he had at one time, now at least to some extent here within Diotrephes. It's a twisted, sick heart in many ways, bent back in on itself. And it's working itself out. It's showing fruit of rejecting the words of John. But that's not all that he's doing, isn't it? That's not the only fruit that's coming out. Not only is he rejecting the words of John, but John says he's also slandering John. He's using words of wicked nonsense, idle words, that they're empty words. Like, John's not in this church, remember. John is at a distance, probably in Ephesus, and while John is gone, Diotrephes is slandering John while he's gone. He's undercutting his authority. He's undermining him. He's trying to position himself in a place that the Apostle John should rightly have. So he's slandering the Apostle John, but that's not all. He's also firmly rejecting the very instruction that John is giving the church to generously support gospel workers. That's these brothers here. He's not showing hospitality to them like we saw in 2 John and saw here in the first part of 3 John. So he's rejecting the specific instruction. The words that John uses here is the same verb to both, that Diotrephes is not receiving John's words, and he's also not receiving the brothers. So it's the same idea. He's not receiving John, nor is he accepting or receiving the brothers. And this is probably the exact instruction in that letter that Diotrephes is saying we're not going to do. But even that's not enough. Not only is he rejecting John and his words and his instruction, but he's preventing other people from showing hospitality to the brothers, from generously supporting gospel workers. And not only that, but those who do show hospitality, he's now punishing. Like, in some way, he's putting them out of the church. These guys, think about a power struggle here. Like, this Diotrephes guy thinks he's just run this local church. He's going to reject John. He's doing the exact opposite of John's instructions. It's a power struggle. It's messy. There's a power play after power play after power play. Diotrephes rejecting John, Diotrephes slandering John, rejecting his instruction, keeping other people from doing it, and then enacting punishment upon those who do obey John. I can't imagine how painful this must be for John to hear about. John is called to pastor this church, right? To guide and care for and to give them an accurate picture of what the gospel is and how that looks. Yet the rejection is happening. But it's not primarily about John's ego. What's at stake here is the health of that local church, isn't it? And the mission of the church. As this church stops supporting generously gospel workers, the real Jesus is not being promoted as strongly as it could be in a culture that needs to hear it. There's a lot at stake. There's competing messages, a competing of leadership, and the health of the church and the mission of the church is at stake. It has to be confusing for that particular church, doesn't it? What leader do I follow? Who do I trust? Who do I allow to shape my view on these things as a Christian in the first century? Who do they follow? And apparently some chose Diotrephes. Apparently he's got some following. I don't know how else he puts people out of the church successfully without some sort of following. Yet Gaius is not a part of that following. It's clear that Gaius is not following Diotrephes. Gaius is listening to the Apostle John. Now, we don't know what Gaius' relationship is to Diotrephes. Maybe they're part of the same church, maybe. I think it's more likely they both have their own house churches, probably in the same vicinity, which makes sense why Diotrephes might have some of the power that he has. If he's hosting the church, he can put people outside of his home. And maybe it makes sense why the Apostle Apostle John, that's Paul and John together, why the Apostle John is so strongly encouraging guys to show hospitality because they're meeting in his church. He's welcoming the church to his home. So that might be the case. But whatever their relationship, they're somehow affecting each other. Maybe Diotrephes is putting pressure on Gaius. Could be. Maybe there's questions welling up in Gaius' own heart and mind. Whatever the case is, John is going to use this power struggle in this local church to help Gaius see how he can discern who to follow. In fact, he's going to encourage Gaius because Gaius is making some good decisions here. So it's some instruction to Gaius and instruction to us. He's going to give us the answer to our question this morning in verses 11 through 12. So let's read 11 through 12 and see what is this guidance that the Apostle John gives to Gaius and us. Verse 11, Beloved, do not imitate evil, but imitate good. Whoever does good is from God. Whoever does evil has not seen God. Demetrius has received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. We also add our testimony, and you know that our testimony is true. So what does John say? John says, okay, guys, you need to discern who to follow. I need you to discern between evil and good and choose the good. That you're going to copy, you're going to mimic, you're going to imitate, you're going to follow the good. And so we say, yeah, of course. We're not wanting to discern evil and follow evil. But it's not always so easy to know what is the good in this case to follow, is it? Especially when the messages probably sound pretty good. We can be pretty good about justifying and making some message sound decent. Yeah, we're using a little bit of scripture. Okay, who do we discern? And so John then immediately gives Gaius some help here. What does he say? How do you discern the good? You look to those people who are actually doing the good. You check their fruit. Are they actually doing the truth? Are they actually walking in the truth? Regardless of what they say, regardless of the message they have and how good that might be, look at how they're actually living. This is how John answers our question for this morning. He does it right here. We check the fruit of those who we're discerning if we should follow them or not. This is consistent with the message of the Bible, isn't it? Just even think with John, over and over and over and over again, he is pleading with his people and encouraging what he already said, what he already sees, and how they are doing the truth that they have. This is the way they're living based on their status with the God of the universe. They have the Spirit, and it's coming out in how they live. We see this with Jesus. He just uses different words. We know the tree by its fruit, right? Good tree produces good fruit. Bad tree produces bad fruit. If you see bad fruit, it means there's something sick there. There's something dying a part of that tree. Good fruit, we have some confidence in the sort of tree it is. And why is that? Think about the specific way that John says over and over again we are to do the truth. Over and over again it says we are to love each other, right? And what he has in mind is this distinctly sort of Christian type of love. It's a love that you can't fake. It's a love that's different than what the world does. It's a love that the Spirit himself has got to do inside of you. It's evidence that you are one of God's. And so as we see that, we know it's the real deal. It's evidence that we've been saved by the God of the universe. So we check the fruit. Even when it's not easy, even when we're trying to discern when it's really, really muddy among the words, check the fruit of the actual leaders, of the people who are vying for your trust. What is the fruit? So Gaius, follow those who are proving that they have the truth by the way they live, and don't follow those who have bad fruit, who have fake fruit, like Diotrephes. So catch the weight that John adds here. John says that those who have good fruit are in relationship with God, but those who have bad fruit, what? They've never seen God, says John. That's just another way of saying they're not in relationship with the God of the universe. They don't have the Spirit. And so think about how that applies now to Diotrephes. This is a not so veiled reference to Diotrephes. John is saying, yeah, Diotrephes is in the church. He's doing these competing messages, but Gaius, he's not even in relationship with the God of the universe. He's not even a part of the family of faith. Follow those who prove that they are, not those who are fakers like Diotrephes. This is weighty. And John's applying this principle, we check their fruit, to Diotrephes, who is in the church and portraying himself as Christian. The local church can be messy, can't it? Just because somebody has a position or a title in the church does not mean you should automatically trust them. Doesn't mean you should follow them automatically. Like, you look for their fruit. Just because my title is pastor does not mean you should automatically trust me. Just because I can share what the Bible is saying and I think have some decent, solid theology does not mean you should automatically follow me or trust me. It's not just pastors in different positions in the church. Just because somebody has some influence, other people are following them, maybe they have really good theology, they have great teaching, they have experienced some success in their life, does not mean we should automatically follow them. Look for their fruit. Look how they're living it out. Does their life evidence they have the Spirit in the first place? If not, we're not going to follow them, regardless of title or position or the current influence that they have. This is actually one of the reasons why a church network that we're exploring to join, while I'm excited about this particular network, because the leaders of that network are evidencing fruit in their life that shows me that they have the Spirit. These guys are humble. How often do you see that in Christian churches or Christian organizations? They're not in it for the glory of themselves. They want to see the God of the universe glorified by the work that they are doing. These are folks who want to actually love each other, not position and leverage each other. So this gives me confidence as we consider this network. We're seeing fruit among the leaders of this network that gives me confidence that maybe we should be able to follow them, because I want that to rub off on me and us as a church. So John writes this to Gaius, and he encourages Gaius that Gaius, you're making some good decisions. You decided not to listen to Diotrephes, that's a good decision. Here's all the ways, all the bad fruit that we see in Diotrephes' life. It's evidence that there's something sick in the root. You chose not to follow him. He's encouraging him in that. Diotrephes is not to be trusted. I want to do a quick aside and touch on something I think is really, really important here, especially as we're thinking about the ways that might be coming up in mind right now, in which you see competing messages and trying to discern who to follow. For John here, these are very two distinct categories he's dealing with in this situation. This is classic John and the duality in John. We have on this side, you do the truth in relationship with God, good fruit. On this side, doing evil, not in relationship and with God, and bad fruit. These are polar opposites, aren't they? But often, as we're trying to discern who to follow, it's not polar opposites like this. It's not as radically out as this. It's something more in the middle. It feels messy and muddier. Like the words sound good, but even it's not we're dealing with an unbeliever and a believer. So there's three things I think really quickly that might help to keep in mind with this. And the first is this. It's just a reminder that none of us can know with 100% certainty if somebody else is a believer or not a believer. We can have some confidence and some high level of confidence based on the fruit in that person's life, but we can't see their heart, and we don't know where their trust ultimately lies, right? So we need to be cautious and slow before we start slapping the labels of believer and unbeliever on people. So that's the first one. The second one is this. Christians sin too, right? So as you see bad fruit in my life, as you see sin in my life, don't slap unbeliever on me, please. And And you see it in each other. Just because we see bad fruit in somebody's life does not automatically mean they are an unbeliever. But, and this might help, I think what we should be looking at is when that bad fruit comes to the attention of the person, right, when they become aware of their sin, look at the fruit of how do they respond, right? If you're discerning if I'm going to follow this person or not, their sin has come to light for them, how are they responding? Are they doubling down on their sin, justifying, defending, or is there a good sort of breaking that's happening in that person? Quick to confess, wanting help to repent and turn from that sin. That is fruit that is really hard to fake. How do they deal when their sin comes before them? Do you see evidence of the Spirit in their heart? So be looking for that particular fruit. Sin, Christian sin too, yep. Really zero in on how do they respond when their sin comes to light for them. And third, I think we've got to remember that disagreements, even strong, passionate disagreements, happen within the church between believer and believer. And often, these sort of strong disagreements happen on secondary and tertiary issues. Remember that from a couple weeks ago? They're not primary issues. Often it's things that we can disagree with as a believer. We can passionately disagree with them as a believer, but we're still believers. Like, you're not going to call me an unbeliever if we're going to disagree on something that's secondary and tertiary. I'm not going to call you an unbeliever if we're disagreeing on something that's a secondary or tertiary issue. So there's some room with that within the church. So let's be slow before we start labeling our heroes and our villains within the church. We need to use some discernment here. Remember, John is not dealing here with a disagreement about a secondary or tertiary issue with Diotrephes. This is the primary gospel issue. This is how the truth that we have works out in Christian life. We generously support gospel workers. The particular thing that John likely had in mind here. That's the good that John likely had in mind, the particular fruit he had in mind. It's a way that it must work itself out. Really, we're talking about obedience or disobedience, aren't we? We're talking about good or evil, in a sense, right? This is a primary gospel issue, and the health of the church and the mission of the church is at stake. So does that make sense? As you're thinking about the different things that we encounter and trying to discern who to follow? I know there's a lot of caveats there. And there's lots of different things to think through. And so I want to be cautious and not allow that to take the edge off of what John is saying, because it's still super effective and helpful that we look for the fruit in people's lives. There's so many layers here, but this is still super helpful. Because think about this, even especially within the church, as we disagree with people, each other on secondary and tertiary issues, we still should do that in a particular way, shouldn't we? It should still be marked by Christian love for each other. So as we see disagreements within Christendom, and we see bad fruit in the way those disagreements are happening, we see sin in the way that relationships are breaking down, that should give us some pause and some caution. Like something is twisted in there. Something is off. Then we're no longer treating each other as fellow Christians with the love that the Spirit is producing inside of us. So that can happen within the church. So John's guidance here with the fruit is we start seeing bad fruit among Christians. Like we've got some confession and repentance to do. So we still look for good fruit, no matter whether it's in the church, outside the church, between believer and unbeliever, or between believer and believer. We should be marked by the sort of good fruit in our disagreements with each other. We see bad fruit, use some extreme caution, regardless of their title or their position or their influence. If the fruit is good, we've got some reason why we may choose to follow that person. So John's going to hit this once more. We've seen so far, we've got a negative example of Diotrephes, and we've got the command from John. We're going to imitate those who do good. Now we're going to have a positive example. John's going to end positively. So, verse 12, enter Demetrius. What does John say about Demetrius? Like, rather than Diotrephes, Demetrius is coming highly commended by three weighty sources. The first is everybody knows the guy. The second is truth itself, being gospel truth, like how we are to be living out the truth that we have. And the third is the Apostle John and his associates. Demetrius' life is conforming to the gospel truth. His life is consistent with the gospel of the things that should be changing in him. His life is showing that good fruit. Everybody who knows him will say it. The truth itself, if it could speak, would say it. John, the Apostle John, says, like, Demetrius is to be trusted. You can follow him. This is interesting to think about. We don't know this for sure, but it could be that Demetrius was one of the people that visited John in Ephesus, and Demetrius is the one who is now delivering this letter to Gaius. And maybe he has 2 John too. So this would be a letter of recommendation of sorts from the Apostle John that Demetrius and this letter can be trusted. And it could even be that Demetrius himself is a gospel worker. Like, think about that. It could be that John is hammering this so hard because he's saying, Gaius, I want you to receive Demetrius as a gospel worker and generously support him. You get to trust him, and you also get to follow him because he's promoting the real Jesus. Look at his fruit. It's obvious. That's how you can tell. The fruit's there. The tree is good. You can trust and follow Demetrius. This can get really tricky today because we consume a lot of media from people that we don't actually know, right? Celebrity Christian leaders have a long reach, whether through the internet or their airwaves or whatever it is. And often the only thing we know about them are the words that are coming out of their mouths, right? And so this is hard to know, what is their actual character like? I'm guilty of this. I think we are way too quick to trust somebody because we like the way that their sermons are or their teachings are without actually knowing the character and the fruit of that person. And story after story after story we hear of preachers and teachers who know the gospel well. They are preaching it at an amazing level, but those people who know them personally share a completely different story. The lust for power or money or just their selves or infidelities in lots of different ways start to come out, and there's some sort of big falling from the person, right? How do we discern then how to follow when it's these people from a distance? I don't know the best way to do it. Maybe, I don't know, there's research we're able to do or something. I think the caution here we at least can do is use more caution here before we blindly start to follow people so we like the words that are coming out of their mouths. I remember several years ago, I was at a conference, and a guy came up, and he was the keynote speaker. And so he's just preaching is all. I've never seen him before. I heard him, but never seen him, never heard him before. And so he's just got these handwritten notes. He's just kind of reading through his handwritten notes. He's got these weird hand gyrations, and it was amazing. And he does this breakout session. I go to this breakout session. He just preaches again. Same deal. The distracting hand things is literally like this. Distracting hand things, reading his handwritten notes. It was amazing. So overnight, this guy becomes my preaching hero. Well, within a year, it comes out he's having an affair. Like the very guy who's preaching about how do you have a good marriage, how do you have purity, how do you go about your own devotional life, his character was horrible. Like the fruit that was coming out of this guy, none of us can justify. He can't justify. But I was so quick to say, he's got it, right? He can talk about the gospel, understand it in ways I've never heard before. I've got to use more caution. You've got to use more caution. So even all the good preaching that he could give, I'm not going to wholeheartedly follow this guy. You cannot compartmentalize the stuff that you say versus your character and what's happening in your heart, right? Like this is going to bleed over. We've got to use caution. Check the fruit. All right, so far this text has been all about how do we discern who we trust, who we follow. We need to check each other's fruit. And what I don't want is for us to leave this morning and now feel like we can't really relate together as a church anymore. There's distance between us. I need to check your fruit and my fruit. I'm not sure if we can be friends. I need to do my homework first. Like we have to walk on eggshells around each other all the time. Like I don't want that. That's not the point of the text here. John's talking about who do we submit to, who we're gonna follow to shape us. We're all shaped in profound ways by the people we listen to. In fact, I want you to hear how John finishes this letter and hear the thrust of how he describes life within the family of faith. Verses 13 through 15. I had much to write to you, but I would rather not write with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we will talk face to face. Peace be to you. The friends greet you. Greet the friends, each by name. Like, do you hear? There's not that sort of distance between John and Gaius. or between those in John's church and Gaius, or between those in John's church and Gaius' church, or between John and those in Gaius' church. Like John is saying, I want to be with you in person, and we're gonna talk more. The people of John's church are extending their greetings, they're extending their Christian love to this church of Gaius' and to Gaius. And John says, guys, I want you to extend my love personally to those people who are also a part of your church. We get this sort of mutual love, mutual affection, a sort of intimacy here within the family of faith, rather than we got to walk on eggshells and keep everybody at a distance. I think it's a beautiful way to end this letter. This broken world that we live in, the impact of the sin in our relationships together and those that we lead, this is all temporary, isn't it? This is all heading somewhere. I want us to think about two thoughts here as we close, and this is just the glory of God for us. We get the gift of being a part of the church, of the family of faith that is going somewhere. There's going to become a day when we are all completely unified around the one and true leader. Like, we're not having to second guess each other. There's not gonna be distance between each other. We're gonna be able to love each other fully with Christian love without trying to think about motives or are they just in it for themselves. That's not going to exist. By God's grace, we are moving in this direction where that is gonna be our destiny. We are all together, unified, recognizing who our leader is, like who we are following together. It is beautiful. And so what we get now, as God moves us more and more to look like his son, as the Spirit works on us to greater and greater degrees, we get a foretaste of that in the church. That doesn't happen outside the church, because this is the Spirit at work in our relationships. So as we learn to love each other more and more, we are getting a taste together what it's gonna be like for eternity. And now think about the second piece. The only reason why you are in this family of faith in the first place is because God graciously saved you. He did for you what you never could. When you were following sin, and that was it, that was your leader, so to speak. When you were following sin and could do nothing else, God graciously plucked you out of that into his family, became your father. He now is the one that you get to follow. This is a God whose fruit is only good, right? Whose thoughts are only good, whose love for you is perfect. Like he can't do otherwise. This is who he is. He's the definition of good. And so by his grace, if you are a believer, if you trust Jesus to save you, you get that to follow. You get the true God of the universe to follow. We don't have to worry about that with God, even through the hard stuff. We don't have to ask the question, well, I better discern the fruit of God and whether I should still follow him or not. We don't have to do that. We've been placed in a perfect relationship with him because of the work of Jesus. That's a gift to us. So among all the mess of the church, of the local church from the first century all the way today, this is where history is heading by the grace of God, and you get to be a part of it because of the work of Jesus for you. So if you're here this morning and you're not a part of that family of faith, you're not trusting Jesus to save you, my pleading with you is to please ask the questions that are in your head and your heart. You're here for a reason. Keep pursuing that. I'd be happy to listen to your story. We are praying that God would put you in that family of faith with where that family is going, getting to follow a leader who is holy and fully good. This reality for us, church, is something that we celebrate every week through communion. We are celebrating what Jesus did to put us in that family and in this family right here. We're celebrating Jesus taking upon himself our sin and his broken body represented by the bread, his blood spilt represented by the wine and the juice to cover our sin, took it upon himself. Remember, he was fully human as well as fully God, and giving us his righteousness instead so we can be in perfect relationship with God. It's beautiful. You could never do it. And remember, church, he didn't stay dead, did he? He rose again from the grave, crushing the power of sin and death forever. And he's gonna come back. We're in this awkward in-between time, but he's gonna come back. So as we celebrate this every week, we are proclaiming and reminding ourselves of what God did for us and all the good, gracious gifts he's given us who are a part of that. This meal is for believers. So if you're not sure if you're a believer or not, if you're part of this family, just stay where you are. It's not awkward. People are going to be up and down. As we get ready to celebrate this, there's two things that I would love for us to keep in mind. They're two parts, so to speak. And the first is reflection. The band will be playing some music. That is a time for you to listen to the Spirit. What's the Spirit applying to you out of this text? What's he showing you? If sin's coming to mind, take the opportunity to confess it. Ask God's help to repent from it. That means turning from that sin, making some changes in your life. And then when you're ready, come on down and celebrate what Jesus has done for you, giving you a brand new identity. No longer that of sinner, but now that of saint. So come on down and celebrate. We'll have servers here. Listen to the gospel they're going to speak over you. Take the bread, dip it in the wine or the juice. Eat it as a tangible reminder of the gospel and head back to your seat. Make sense? All right, let me pray for us as we get ready to celebrate. God, even in passages like this where it feels like it's primarily horizontal, it's primarily about people to people and how do we discern and being careful, even here, you're displaying your glory and your goodness to us. Even as we deal with sin in a broken world and all the muddiness, we know that's not the end of the story. That you've plucked us out of that. You've put us in a different family. A family who one day sin's not going to be a part of. Man, you're gracious and good. And even now, while we're in the muck and the mess, you don't leave us alone. You've given us your Spirit to help us discern, your Spirit who produces the fruit that helps us see in other people. You use the Apostle John to remind us of what's true this morning. God, you love us. You're showing it over and over. So even now, as we prepare to celebrate what your Son did, your plan from eternity past to save us, would we be listening to your Spirit? Help us to do that. Where your Spirit might be bringing to mind, applying to our hearts. Help us to listen. And then I also pray you'd help us to celebrate. Will this not become old? Just because we do this every week and hear about the gospel every week, will this not become old? So God, by your grace, help us to celebrate the glorious truth of the gospel this morning. We pray these things in Jesus' name.